Welcome to the show, where we discuss time-tested and science-supported tools for better health, long life, and pleasures. I'm Lilian Zeltzer, and for over 3 decades, I researched, practiced, and hunted for natural solutions for better health, love, longevity, and pleasures. In the process, I discovered many effective time-tested and science-supported solutions which can be beneficial to those who want to take care of their lives. Because as Hippocrates said in the 4th century BC, if you are not your own doctor, you're a fool. In today's episode, we'll talk about what can make you live longer and happier, and what role your libido plays in that equation. Our guest expert today is Dr. David Bernstein, an award-winning author and highly respected physician with 40 years of experience in internal medicine and geriatrics, an associate clinical professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of South Florida College of Medicine. Welcome to the show, Dr. Bernstein.
Thank you, Lillian. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Everyone wants to live long, healthy, and happy life. However, most of us believe that aging is a natural and inevitable process, while geriatricians call aging a medical condition. Is it true that you can treat aging? You can reverse it? How?
Well, Lillian, it's a very provocative question, and it can be answered in a lot of different ways, because from the day we're born, we're getting older every day, and we'll never be as young as we were yesterday. So in terms of numbers, we are aging, but in terms of what goes on between our ears and what goes on in our heart, that's a totally different story. And I've learned a considerable amount of things in my 40 years of practice. I've learned from my patients, I've learned from my research, and I've listened and I'm learning more about what people can do to slow down the aging process. So if I can take a few examples for you. When I sat down and interviewed my patients and other patients who've aged really well, and I called it aging gracefully, and I distilled it to 5 elements. And by the way, most of the time I will speak in 5s because there are 5 fingers on my hand and I can remember them. And most people can only remember 5 things at a time. So if I give 5 explanations for things, people can remember them. And then I made it even easier in my first writing. I came up with the acronym GRACE, G-R-A-C-E. And each of those letters stands for one element that I observed in my patients who really live these deep, healthy, happy lives. And the first letter, G, stands for goals. And people who have a goal or a purpose in life have something to wake up for, something that invigorates them, something that challenges their mind, which are all things that make us more youthful. The second letter is R. It stands for roots. Well, that could be like roots in the ground or family roots, but it also can have something to do with your DNA. And your DNA will have some impact on how long you live. If you have family that live short lives, my recommendation is figure out what happened and do something about it. Change how you're living your life. Don't live a life like they did. Or if you had great roots and great DNA, do something about that. Protect them and lead a safer life, because you're prone to live longer. A is for attitude, an attitude of gratitude, kindness, and generosity and adventure. I know a lot of what you talk about has to do with adventure, and adventure is really good. It gets us sort of on those skinny branches in life and makes us really be challenged about what we do. The letter C stands for companionship, which is also something that is incredibly important And we're learning more and more about it. And is one of the areas that I've really focused my attention in the last few years, because having a companion, having a partner in life, that's someone to look after you and you to look after them, and form a coupleship and the special intimate bond that only two people might be able to share. And the fifth element in my GRACE pentagon is environment, how we act with the outside environment and how we act with the environment within us, how we like to delve into nature and be out in fresh air and get sunlight and be with the elements. And then the inside environment, how we eat, how we exercise, how we take care of what's inside of us. So those are things, when I interviewed my patients, I found that helped them live a long, healthy life. And it also equates with having resilience.
I read your brilliant books, and I was fascinated by the power of 5 formula, where 5 words that all start with S, yes, number 5, your magic number, can actually give you ammunition to live happy and long and healthy life. Can you elaborate a little bit on that without going too much into science?
Well, when you asked me earlier about aging, I've equated aging with inflammation. And in my daily activities of seeing patients, there were 3 main things that I saw that created chronic illness. And it's one thing to live to be 90 and be chronically ill and not enjoy a 20 or 30-year period of your life, but you want to live the best life possible. And so there were 3 things that I saw: cancer, heart disease, and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease. And when I studied further, I realized they're all related to inflammation. And so inflammation in your body is like rusting on the inside. And nobody wants to have rust on their car or rust on their batteries or rust anywhere, because that's like corrosion and you don't want to corrode. So it has to do with inflammation in our bodies, and particularly blood vessels, because blood vessels supply our brain, our heart, and the rest of our body, including our sex organs. So when we want to have the best possible life with intimacy and so forth, taking care of that inflammatory reaction in our body is important. So there were 5 things that I relate to inflammation, all that begin with the letter S. Sweets, which is our diet, carbohydrates, sugars, processed foods create inflammation. Stress releases cortisol in our body, which is an inflammatory hormone. Sleep. Inadequate sleep is another stressor in our body, and our brains and bodies can't rejuvenate unless we get sleep. And then there's sweat. That's my euphemism for one of my favorite activities, which is exercise, and getting somewhere between 150 and 450 minutes a week is incredibly important, and science has shown that that's beneficial. Also, exercise is the best antidepressant that's ever been discovered. And in the past few years, and as recently as yesterday, I read a study about how exercise helps reduce the recurrence of cancers. So one wants to not leave 35% improvement behind by not exercising in their cancer recovery. And lastly, sex. S stands for sex, but it also stands for socialization and those connections that I talked about. And sex is a really intimate event. And the opposite of intimacy is loneliness. And that's another health hazard that one is recommended to avoid. And there are some things I've talked about how we can avoid that. But loneliness, that health hazard, is also very important to consider.
So it is stress, sleep, sweat, sweets, and sex. While all of these are important pillars that support longevity and health and happiness, I would like to concentrate today on just one S of this formula, sex. If the purpose of human life on Earth was only the reproduction of our species, then everyone would die at the point of menopause once we stop producing babies. I found a old Greek proverb. It says, "The heart that loves is always young." To what degree it is correct, and why?
Well, having that intimacy brings people together. And when people are together, they'll share a certain amount of energy, an amount of compassion for one another, an amount of looking after one another and supporting one another. And without bringing too much science into it, but the data is pretty clear that people who are in coupleship will live longer. And I'd seen it in that career that I had that spanned 40 years of watching people who supported one another, who loved one another, and really looked after each other in immense ways, sometimes surprising me how much, sometimes surprising me how intimate people were and that they would share that with me. And that intimacy is just so incredibly important. And whether there's the act of vaginal penetration during their intimacy or other ways of sharing that intimacy really bore itself out in terms of how well people looked after one another and how important that connection was in their lives.
Yes, well, for centuries, we have been made to believe that with age, our sexual drive is doomed to decline or even vanish. However, my great-grandfather, who was killed during one of the Ukrainian pogroms at the turn of last century, married when he was 87, a 40-year-old woman. And in the next 10 years, they had 4 boys, 4 sons. One of them was my grandfather. Well, is it something genetic that or it's something to do with lifestyle? To what degree human libido is responsible for our longevity?
Sometimes that's luck, and sometimes it's society that it was important in your great grandfather's century when he lived. It was important to procreate because of pogroms and starvation and famine and disease, and life expectancies were only about 40 back then. And people knew that if they were going to produce offspring to care for them, they would have to produce enough offspring to do that. So that explains part of it. And most of the men, and I had the great fortune of taking care of many men in their 80s and 90s and a few in their hundreds, they thought about sex every day. They never stopped thinking about it, except for men who might have had prostate cancer and got feminizing hormonal injections. But sex was a big part of their lives. And even some of my patients who spend their lives working with one another, my retired Salvation Army officer patients who were great patients, but they showed love and respect for one another, and they were intimate in whatever ways they could be late in their lives. I will say that I read some article in the last few years about diminished sexual activity among our younger generation, and that holds true today. So it sort of breaks my heart and sad that would diminish. I'll say one other thing before you break back in, but some of this has to do with our health. And when I talked about inflammatory diseases and vascular disease is a big part of it, when 50% of the world population is obese, and that obesity leads to vascular disease and penile erection is dependent upon a good circulation. And when that circulation isn't there, then having erections is difficult and intimacy may fade. So, one of the points about my Power of Five formula is to avoid the inflammatory conditions so you can maintain good vascular circulation so you can remain intimate.
Since you touched on that subject about erections and about possibilities of having sex, intimacy in older age, I understand that occasional stressing of our bodily system, like driving during peak hours or hiking or dancing or swimming, whatever it is, actually works positively and can reset our biological clock. Would it be correct to say that active love life is an excellent source of life-extending physical, emotional, and mental stress that is necessary for living longer and happier lives?
I certainly wouldn't argue the point because it's really quite true. I mean, it fits in with the fact that being active, taking care of your body, showing an interest in another person, if dancing and swimming and being active is part of what it takes to reduce inflammation, those are all very positive things that would contribute to one's ability to continue to partake in sexual activity. And then, there's the socialization part. Dance is really great because, there's the physical activity and there's the touching activity and there's a movement and not to mention the fact there's some reminiscence about when I used to dance back 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It sets apart a certain mood and a certain reminiscence that will drive some of that. So there's a lot of different factors in the brain and different areas of the brain that get activated during some of that activity.
I often hear people in their autumn age saying that they don't feel a day older than when they were in their 20s, 30s, whatever. Is that only a psychological phenomenon, or it is an indicator of great health or some sort of biological age reverse? How much on average does the chronological age differ from the biological age of the person, and how can we measure it? Is it measurable?
Well, we weren't going to talk a lot about science, but since you asked the question, and I'm not an expert, but I can tell you there are research programs going on, and there are some commercially available tests now available at a considerable price to evaluate your biological clock and compare it to your chronologic clock. And the whole idea is for science to eventually catch up, to be able to say, oh, well, your clocks are not balanced. Here's some things that science has discovered that will help adjust your chronologic and biologic clocks, such as things that would influence the activity of the mitochondria, these components of your cells that have something to do with energy. Or here's an area where I'm not well versed in, but certain supplements. And I'm not a big supplement guy, but there probably are things either in supplements or I believe if you eat a whole food plant-based diet, you're going to get most everything you need. But there may be some additional things that would drive that are currently under research today. And as a little clue, one of the things that's being looked at is an anti-rejection drug called rapamycin. Now, people shouldn't go out and Google rapamycin and try and find out what it does, but they're finding that rapamycin is something that slows down biologic aging. And there's another drug that is one of the most popular drugs that gets used. And as a physician, I prescribed it a lot, particularly for my diabetic patients, only for my diabetic patients. Let's be real clear. And that medicine is metformin. And the finding is that metformin also has some favorable effects on your biologic clock, such that diabetics who took metformin had longer life expectancies than diabetics who didn't take metformin. And most diabetics took metformin because it was considered the first line of treatment, and it was the least expensive diabetic medication available.
Actually, going back a little bit in our conversation, you mentioned that married men lives longer. I also heard that women, on average, live longer than men. Is there something to do with women's ability to be intimate at any age in comparison to men? Are we advantaged?
There's an old joke about what women do to men, but that doesn't apply here. Ha ha. I just think there's some biologic differences between men and women that enable women to live longer. I don't know that I've seen anything about their ability to remain intimate longer in life. I think there are some hormonal differences between men and women. Most of for all too much of my career, I got the feeling women checked out their sex lives sooner than men. They may have been able to perform, but for the most part, their hormonal drive to be intimate was reduced.
Okay.
And you probably heard that, I presume.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is a controversial subject. And of course, women's liberation can be linked somehow to our longevity or ability to live longer than men, but then it is subject to how you interpret women, our psychology, our physiology. Well, today's conversation we can basically summarize by the words of Abraham Lincoln, who said, in the end, it is not the years in your life that count. It is the life in the years. In other words, it's not how long you live, but how you live. That's what matters. On behalf of our audience and myself, I would like to thank you for your time and for sharing those practical tips and your knowledge. And I wish you a long, happy life. And I hope to see you again on our program. Thank you, Dr. Bernstein.
I'd love to come back. Thank you, Lillian. It was a pleasure speaking with you today.
I'll share with you an amazing 17th century aphrodisiac recipe for men, designed to raise sensual desire and performance. I learned this recipe from a Mongolian nomad who assisted me in my hunt for the wild Siberian golden root, also known as Rhodiola rosea. And here's the story. Once upon a time, in a small provincial Lithuanian town, there lived a plus-sized girl by the name of Marta. Because of her generous proportions, she found it difficult to find someone to marry her. One day, she heard that the wife of the Russian Tsar, who was a 7-foot giant, had recently become a holy sister just to escape her marital duties, and that now Peter the Great was looking for a new wife. After consulting with a local witch, Martha walked all the way to St. Petersburg, where she got employed as a kitchen maid at the Tsar's best friend's palace. Soon after, at the royal dinner, unexpectedly for everyone, Martha placed a peculiar-looking dish in front of the Tsar, which was based, of course, on the witch's recipe. When the Tsar asked her what it was, she playfully replied, "An egg of love." All the rest is history. Martha married Peter the Great and became known in history as Catherine, the first empress of Russia, Catherine the Great, who produced 12 children to Peter. And to commemorate her egg of love recipe, Tsar ordered from his jeweler by the name of Fabergé a bejeweled egg, which became a symbol of royal love, wealth, and fertility. The recipe and the link for the ingredients, if you're looking for them, are located right under this video. I hope you will enjoy this wonderful aphrodisiac recipe, which on many occasions was enjoyed by my husband and our family friends. And for now, to health, long life, and pleasures. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you won't miss any of the new episodes. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions, please put them below the video. I do read them. If you are looking for a good, reliable source of specific ingredients, experts, services, or products, click on the resources link under this video. To health, long life, and pleasures.